Greetings everyone, this is Rambling Collector here, and welcome back for another book review. So, for the subject of this video, we're going to be diving once more into the library of James Patterson with the book Hush, part of the Harriet Blue series, co-written by Candice Fox with James Patterson along the way. Now this one here, I will say, after reading a lot of Patterson's works, or at least a fair few, I will say this one definitely earns its mark in the Patterson library. But I do have some particular issues that I will address further on in the video. However, do not let that detract from the fact that I did enjoy this novel. And thus far, a lot of times when I've dove into James Patterson's works, I've always come out feeling satisfied, at the very least. But let's first go ahead and continue talking about Hush, shall we, as well as some of the major highlights of this particular book. So first and foremost, what is the synopsis for Hush? Well, our detective Harriet Blue is currently imprisoned, as well as fired from the police department that she has served for years now, of most of her life. So I will say though, this being my introduction to the character, Harriet Blue by herself was a very fun character to follow with her own personal demons and experiences. But for me, besides Harriet herself, Tox Barnes as a side character also proves himself as a standout with every chapter he appears in, which makes these two my personal favorites out of the whole entire cadre that we see from Harriet Blue, whose little posse of police officers and investigators. Now, granted, I will say out of all of them, Harriet's and Tox's chapters, whenever they did pop up, always enthralled me. Tox especially with the fact that this is a man who has many battle scars, both from his days in his past as well as his work as a detective and police officer. You can tell that this man has been through quite a lot, judging by his very gruff exterior, the way he walks and talks, everything. Harriet herself definitely has a lot of personal demons that she has to deal with, particularly in this book when the subject of the story is that she is brought out of prison by the police commissioner who put her there in the first place, because now his daughter and grandchild have gone missing, and he needs Harriet and her crew to help find his missing child. Now, that particular type of plot really was a very cool highlight, and honestly, it kept me gripped a lot of times whenever I did dive into this book again. And honestly, the overarching plot of that proved definitively engaging, being propped up by the small moments in between major points in the story. Now, what I mean by that is that while the overarching plot was, of course, Harriet and the crew searching for this missing child and grandchild, over time throughout the story, we would always get these little moments in between the investigation where Harriet would be looking at a biker gang, or possibly finding out something from her past, or having those moments where she spends and either walking a dog or meeting a guy, just random moments here and there, and even Tox himself having a few moments of romance, meeting a doctor that he has encountered quite a few times, and learning her history, them getting together and having a passionate honeymoon phase romance. And honestly, I feel like that really hammers home all of this, because I love those detective stories, like for instance Jim Butcher's Dresden Files, where the investigation isn't all the story is. There's always those little softer moments for the main characters so that you know that even though they might be these badass investigators and super cops, a lot of the times they're still very much human. They have emotions. They get attached. They deal with their own personal demons and struggles that we may not be aware of at the time, but as we get to know them and see the world through their eyes, we get to see their perspective and understand them, which makes them a lot more human and a lot more versatile for us to connect with them as the reader to the character, and thus we become more engaged in the story. Now personally, I really liked that. However, I do have a few minor complaints that I will address here in a little bit, but overall, Hush by itself really was a great novel. But now, let's move on to the random thoughts, shall we? So, first and foremost, I have a few grievances to address here with this book. Namely, the fact of, after doing further research during this particular novel, I came to find out that this was actually the end of an entire 5-book series. And needless to say, I was not happy about that. And this addresses one of the major problems I always have with James Patterson's works. And that is the sheer enormity and size of the library that this man has established, not just by himself, but also with other writers as well. All the co-writer and co-author stories that he has crafted, and the various series and one-off novels he has made. But that's the main problem I always have with the Patterson novels, is because there are so many out there. And to the unaware reader who has not researched about this author, they would never know whether they're looking at a full-blown series unless it was blatantly obvious. Or in some cases, they might not know it's a one-off novel. You might think, oh, I really would want more of the story. Is there a sequel? Nope, it's a one-off. But then you might find yourself picking up a random book in a library or a store, and you never know that it is part of an entire ongoing series that is either still going or has already ended. But again, you would never know. As for myself, I picked up Hush randomly from, I want to say a Goodwill store. Yeah, I'll say a Goodwill. I randomly picked it up, it sounded really good, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I was definitely miffed when I later found out that it was, in fact, the final book of a series. Needless to say, I was not happy about that at all. Because now, for me, the fun comes from learning more about a story. Now, do I know that there is more? Yes, I do know that there is more. Would I be eager to learn more? Absolutely. But the problem is now, I know how the series may end. Will there be another one? I am not sure. From what I understand, this series has been wrapped up. And honestly, even after all of this, I still feel like there are some unanswered questions from what I have seen from the end of this particular book, of Hush. Now, will I be curious to check out more of Harriet Blue as a character and see more of her story? Absolutely. But overall, my main overarching problem with James Patterson is that unless you do a lot of research on him, especially with a particular book, it becomes a chore where you have to find out which of his books are either one-off novels or a full-blown ongoing series, and some of them may not be blatantly obvious. So just for myself, one of the other books I have reviewed in the past, turns out it was actually the third book of a series, the Black Book series, which I myself am actually looking into further reading because I really enjoyed the characters and what was going on in that series. But that is the main problem. And there's actually a funny story here where it actually worked in a sense, and that was with, again, Jim Butcher's Dresden Files. My dad had a few of the hardbacks for some of the Dresden Files, namely from Proven Guilty all the way to, I want to say Changes. Yeah, Changes. However, I myself at the time was not aware that these were actually the second half of the series of Dresden Files. Now, there were always those nuggets of past stories that I was not aware of, but learning that there was more to look back on, I actually was filled with excitement, because, funnily enough, starting at the halfway point of the series did not detract from my enjoyment of it, at all. Now, if I had read one of the later books in the series, I would have been so extremely lost. But reading where I did, at basically the halfway point of Dresden Files, and then reading onward. In fact, my first ever Dresden Files novel was White Knight, if I remember correctly. But that did not detract from my enjoyment of Harry as a character. Now with James Patterson, it's a lot more of an argumentative statement. And I might need to make a separate video on this with some authors in particular, just to detail how sometimes multiple series can be a bad thing, but oftentimes it can also be a good thing, because there are many jumping on points where you can learn more about a certain author. But then again, sometimes it can also backfire, especially when you jump into an unknown point of the story and then find yourself in the middle of an entire series. But that I will save for another video and probably make that into a real talk. We'll see what happens there. But With that being said, because of the fact that this was the conclusion of a series that I read, and it was my first jumping on point for the Harriet Blue series, I did have to knock off a few points for that, just to warn you all. But now, let's move on to the final score. So overall, I would have to give Hush a solid 7 out of 10 is where I feel comfortable putting this one. Overall, it was enjoyable, but again, I would have to knock off points for the fact that this was the end of a series to my unknown knowledge. Now, will that detract me from wanting to pick up more of the Harriet Blue series further on? Absolutely not. However, let's face the facts, folks. There's always going to be another book that's going to grab attention, and James Patterson, I love him as a writer, but there is just a lot there that I don't know if I could ever conquer that type of mountain, but I might pick and choose a few rocks to pull from the pile. But overall, you guys, let me know your thoughts on this book if you have read it before, or the Harriet Blue series in general if you have read that yourself. I would love to hear some opposing thoughts and ideas, and have a good little discussion with you all in the comments section. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching. If you did like this video, feel free to leave a like, comment your thoughts down below, and subscribe if you're interested for more videos further on in the future. Or if you have any future suggestions for reads for me to check out and review, and you never know, I might just tag you in a future video and let you know, hey, I have heard your voice, here's the recommendation you gave me, thank you so much for giving it to me. And once again, you guys, if you want to check out some of the book reviews I have done in the past, feel free to check out the Book Rambles playlist that I will have here at the end of the video. Or if you're curious for some of the other works that I've done, please feel free to check out those playlists as well. This is Rambling Collector, signing off for now, and I will see you all in the next video, readers. Have a great day.